Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Carl Sagan once said, "One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. Almost never get it back, but sometimes you do. Sometimes something so outrageous happens, and the people have no choice but to wake up and say, we've had enough." Stacey.
Ya me cansé. See, when we are translated into Spanish, they won't need to dub that.
Ya me cansé.
They might need to dub that. I don't know if you're... But let's start with Mexico, where the people are rising up. They've been bamboozled long enough, but here they've had enough. Finally, Mexico protests at a mission that 43 missing students were massacred. A demonstration sparked by the Mexican government's announcement that 43 student teachers disappeared by police in the southern city of Iguala 6 weeks ago were probably massacred in a rubbish dump, ended at the weekend with masked protesters setting fire to the wooden door of the ceremonial presidential palace in Mexico City, main Zocalo Square. So what has happened is there's a husband and wife mayor team down in Iguala. The husband's term was up, and the wife was going to become the new mayor, or so she was announcing her campaign for mayor. And these student protesters, the teacher-student protesters, were going to protest at her live announcement. She didn't want these people interfering with her speech, so she had them burned in the dump. And all 43 of them are dead, and now the people are saying we've had enough.
Right, just incinerate the dissenters. Where have we seen that before? I wonder. So, yeah, this is really a new level of outrageousness by the kleptocrats, the ruling jihadists, whether they're in Mexico or elsewhere. And, yeah, sure, they'll burn a few dozen folks because it's inconvenient to have any exercise of a right to speech. And so the global insurrection against banker occupation that we've been tracking on the show for a number of years is reaching now new heights of conflict.
Well, this is the point that we're talking about, is that this corruption always leads inevitably to this unequal justice system that we have around the world, whether it was before the French Revolution, and Marie Antoinette was not quite as vicious perhaps as this woman here, the mayor in Iguala, but she said let them eat cake to the starving peasants. Here this woman said...
There's no deterrent for this kind of behavior for decades now, and particularly in the last 10 years, and so the outrageousness of the plutocrats at the top is getting completely more outrageous. So yes, there is that Marie Antoinette element about this where the ruling elite are so detached from their day-to-day lives, supposedly representing the people, that they simply incinerate folks because they're inconveniently getting in their way. This is now, as I also noticed in the States, that wealth and income gap is at exactly where it was in 1929 before that major crash. So this is also leading up to an event of some type.
Yeah, and if the political elite and if the financial elite get away with things, if the cartel elite in Mexico get away with things, they're never prosecuted for anything. Of course, they eventually come to the point where they're like, I don't want these people, 43, 53, 103 people interrupting my speech. Let's burn them. Or those peasants in the background don't go with my dress today. Let's burn them and get rid of them. That's a natural outcome. I want to also point out that Ya me cansé is it's not a hashtag that's trending in America. Americans usually tend to care so deeply about the people of Benghazi, the people of all sorts of areas of the world where, coincidentally or not, their own military-industrial complex is interested in intervening in, but they don't care about their own neighbors. Nobody seems to be shrieking about this.
Right. Well, as we've been saying, eventually some region's going to break through and succeed with their insurrection. So the Scottish people voted no for referendum. That was sad. But then the Catalans, as we hoped, have come out very strongly for their independence. And now in Mexico, they have all the ingredients are on the table now for a proper insurrection against a government that is completely out of control and acting as malicious, murdering kleptocrats.
also this week, of course, in Mexico, they've discovered that there's a $7 million house given to the president by some business people who are apparently also getting a lot of state contracts. So again, this is not something that Americans on Twitter really care about. They don't hashtag it. They don't think that, oh my God, our neighbors, our good friends, our allies they're so corrupt and they're burning students to death because they might interrupt a speech. How it's like worse than Marie Antoinette. But they're also the people down there protesting in Mexico City. They were shouting, it was the state in an effort to push home the message that the federal authorities have yet to accept the depth of the institutional crisis exposed by the events in Iguala. Now, obviously, it's an extreme situation there. It's worse than what we saw in the French Revolution in terms of how Marie Antoinette behaved. But in America, we have a situation where, the people's pension funds and wealth are stolen or evaporated or burned for the same inconsequential reasons. Here's a $70 million yacht right behind us. It could be because somebody needs to make a yacht payment, so they're like, oh, I'm going to burn that old granny's pension fund. And one day we'll also say, enough is enough. We're tired. Basta. Let's burn this place down.
Or as CNBC's Joe Kernan might put it, oh, why don't those Mexicans just use dollars? Why don't those Mexicans just use dollars? I mean, there's a lot of great golf courses in Mexico. I love to go there on vacation. Why can't Mexico just use dollars? I don't get it. It wouldn't it be more convenient for us? Hey, those protesters are in the way. Just burn them. Hey, why doesn't Canada use dollars? I like watching hockey games. They should use dollars. And if there's anybody getting in my way, let's burn them. Let's just incinerate them. Then let's incinerate everyone we don't like. Yeah, let's go down that path. It worked so well in the 1930s and 40s. Just incinerate our opposition. Yeah, AIPAC's behind it. The U.S. is behind it. The UK is behind it. Everyone's behind it. Just burn them to death. Well, the people, of course, are saying, you know what? Fire burns both ways,
And so we're going to turn to another ally of America, which is India, where we're seeing corruption happening all the way down to the very bottom. Here, the students aren't, they're joining in on the corruption. They're not trying to fight it. They're joining in. And this is from the BBC, the students who feel they have the right to cheat. It is our democratic right, a thin, addled-looking man, Pratap Singh, once said to me as he stood chai in hand outside his university in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh. Cheating is our birthright. Corruption in the university exam system is common in this part of India. The rich can bribe their way to examination success. There's been a whole subset of the youth population who are brokers between desperate students and avaricious administrators. Now, the politically connected don't have to pay the bribes. What they do is they put daggers in the desk of the teacher, the person rating the exam, grading it. And they take that as a hint that this guy's politically connected. I could be topped, I could be off. But now the poor also want to be able to buy their way. They also want to cheat. And they talked to one woman who says, if you really want to know the truth, there's no point in studying properly. You just need to buy one of the cheat books sold in the bazaar and learn the answers. And she says, I tried actually doing it the right way the first year, and that was stupid because everybody passed me by.
Well, obviously, the central bank in India will take all those books from all those universities, bring them over to the bank and stamp money onto the pages of the paper and feed that back into the economy so the students can use that new fiat money to buy results on the tests that they need to excel and perhaps become central bankers themselves, who can then buy textbooks from the open market and stamp some Indian denomination on that paper and feed it back into the vicious loop of grade inflation, money inflation, and moral degradation. In the UK, they don't care about pedophile. They don't care. Money printing is the solution for everything. You got a rape problem? Print money. You got pedophiles in your cabinet here? Just print money. That's all you need to do. Print money.
Well, that's what exactly in the UK and the US, the governments are able to get away with their corruption because people are bamboozled by house prices rising. As long as their house prices are rising, they don't really care. But then it will be too late. Unless you have to do a ya me canse sort of moment. Now, in the U.S.
You don't like my pronunciation of ya me case? It sounds like my house. Yay, no, yay, my house. Yay, my casa.
So I want to move to another headline from America where we also have corruption, and this is why innocent people plead guilty. This is in the New York Book Review of Books, and it's from Judge Jed S. Rakoff. He's a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of New York. We all know him because, of course, he was famously turned down that $285 million deal between the SEC and the Citigroup. Citigroup committed mortgage fraud, but they didn't have to deny or admit anything, and they paid a $285 million fine. Judge Rakoff said, this is not how justice works. He turned that down. Well, he says that we're no longer, we're going against what Thomas Jefferson said when he said, "I consider that trial by jury is the only anchor ever yet imagined by man which a government can be held to the principles of the Constitution." He said back in 1980, 19% of federal criminal cases went to jury. Now it's less than 3%. And he said, as a consequence, this has happened because the prosecutors basically determine everything. Judges don't do it anymore. Prosecutors can use these mandatory minimum sentences and threaten the likes of, say, Aaron Schwartz, who had to plead guilty if he wanted to avoid 60, 70 years in prison. So he was encouraged to plead guilty, face 3 years in prison, have a felony charge where he would never be able to vote, never be able to participate in democracy again, and yet he decided to just kill himself. Well, he says that how many people are pleading or actually innocent and pleading guilty. And he says, how prevalent is the phenomenon of innocent people pleading guilty? The few criminologists who have thus far investigated the phenomenon estimate that the overall rate for convicted felon as a whole is between 2 and 8%. The size of that range suggests the imperfection of the data, but let us suppose that it is even lower, say no more than 1%. When you recall that of the 2.2 million Americans in prison right now, over 2 million are there because of plea bargains. We are then talking about an estimated 20,000 persons or more who are in prison for crimes to which they pleaded guilty but did not in fact commit the crime.
Well, because the prosecutors are owned by the prison industry. The prison industry is a private industry. They need prisoners to fill up the prisons to get paid bonuses on their private stock holdings, and they buy the prosecutors. So the prosecutors are paid per prosecution. The judges are threatened with death, that if they adjudicate in any reasonable way, they'll be murdered. And so America is a third world,
Well, I don't know about that, but certainly they aren't promoted, and will never make attorney general. They never will be promoted into a federal judge circuitship. But I want to say, the exact opposite happens. Here, these are people, at least 20,000 Americans are innocent and in jail. We know that there are at least 20,000 guilty bankers on Wall Street that are not in jail, and they don't even have to admit anything. They pay a small fine. They will never face prison, ever. There's never any sort of situation like this. Here we have 20,000 innocent Americans in prison because of the prosecutorial system, which goes after them. Prosecutors, however, will not go after Wall Street.
Right, and the legal system, just like the money printing, they just print new laws. If the current laws don't work for them to get their bonuses, they print new laws. So it's either print more money, print more laws, print more money, print more laws. I mean, you should be buying Hewlett-Packard stock in here because they make the big printer industry supplier of cartridges or ink, printer ink. There's got to be a way to play this collapse of the United States empire. Anyway, we must be trottling on along, Stacy.
Yeah, me can't.
Well, there you have it. It's all tequila to me. Stay tuned for the second half and a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Alayne Fleischmann, the J.P. Morgan whistleblower profiled in the latest edition of the Rolling Stone by one of the greatest journalists of our day, Matt Taibbi. Alayne, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, now, Alayne Fleischmann, you are apparently J.P. Morgan's worst nightmare. That's a job I've been trying to get for years now, but apparently you've got it. Tell us, how did you get this to be on J.P. Morgan's worst nightmare list? What's going on?
Well, it's taken a few years for sure. Basically, back in 2006, I saw some stuff going on and wrote up a letter about it, and it's taken another 6 years through the SEC, through the DOJ, but I guess I've finally arrived in your spot, Max.
All right, tell us exactly what's specifically what your job was and what was the thing that got you to blow the whistle.
Well, it started out, everything seemed normal, and then a new diligence supervisor came in who immediately when he came in, suddenly a lot of information started getting blocked off, and he had this policy of no emails. He wouldn't send emails, and we weren't allowed to send him emails. If you tried to do it, he would actually come out and yell at you and tell you not to send them. Things were already a little bit strange, and then in particular in October 2006, we had this pool come in of loans, which, back then we were buying loans from Countrywide and all those originators that everyone knows about so well now. And our job was then to take those, make sure they were good enough to sell to investors, and then pass them along. So we had this pool come in, which normally they go back maybe 2-3 months. They went back, 7-8 months. And when you know the industry, you know that if something's that old, it's because they tried to sell it and no one else would buy it. Or worse yet, they've actually sold it and somebody bought it and then turned around and went, "What? This has missed too many payments. We're selling it right back to you."
Okay, so this goes going back 4, 5, 6 years now, where what's known as the subprime crisis or the mortgage crisis, where banks like J.P. Morgan were packaging toxic securities, and by all observers, they were doing so knowingly, that they were knowingly scraping the barrel and selling these toxic securities. And as you just pointed out, securities that had been thrown into the garbage essentially and left to rot to die. They were dumpster diving, Jamie Dimon, diving into a garbage pail full of toxic garbage and then recycling that garbage and selling it into the marketplace. And I understand you were just on another news outlet with Steve Miller, the current chairman of AIG, who claims, as does Jamie Dimon, that they were too stupid to know the difference between right and wrong. Do you buy that?
Well, the thing that I find absolutely amazing is how these people who are taking millions of dollars per year because they supposedly have all this incredible knowledge can then turn around and say they fundamentally didn't understand the products they were selling, how the housing market works, that it even goes up. And with all these internal warnings, they just didn't understand the internal warnings. It's amazing to watch.
Well, I mean, it's beyond just amazing to watch. And I don't mean to be imprudent here, but isn't this the defense of the rapist? That the victim of the rape wanted to get raped? Because this is what I hear from Jamie Dimon. He said the borrower wanted to get borrowed. I sold him toxic securities. I sold him tainted meat. I gave them the Ebola virus. But that's what they wanted. So isn't it the rapist blaming the victim? Jamie Dimon has the moral equivalency of a rapist. Why is he allowed to continue doing the job that he's doing? And why are you the only person in America willing to stand up to defend those who are being victimized by him?
Well, and one of the fundamental things that I've seen all over the media that if you work in the industry, you know, is just not true at all and completely backwards, is this the idea that somehow you don't have any obligations to sophisticated investors. It just doesn't make any sense. These securities are only sold to sophisticated investors. So if the laws don't apply to sophisticated investors, who are they for? The other thing, too, is, you know, they say sophisticated investors, but these are pension funds, they're 401ks, they're retirement plans, and everyone in the industry selling these knows that. And basically what you're doing when you're doing these, you know, when you're JP Morgan, is you're actually putting these together, putting a big stamp on the front of this document that says, we've looked at these are good quality, and we've told you everything about them. So basically it was, you know, trust us, and then afterwards, oh no, it's your fault for trusting us.
Well, but we have some perjury going on here. In 2010, Jamie Dimon lied to Congress. He said, quote, in mortgage underwriting, somehow we just missed, you know, that home prices don't go up and stuff forever. So again, he's playing the role of the jilted girl at the cotillion who didn't get a date somehow on the dance floor after he just bamboozled an entire generation with the most toxic that's ever come out of the tail end of an investment bank. What about this perjury in front of Congress? How did Congress now? Are they going to recall? Are they going to go after him? Or are they just going to let this fly like they do apparently on everything else?
Well, I mean, the amazing thing in the article that sort of quote and information comes from is that it also says that, so basically what happened is the servicers, because remember, JP Morgan takes payments on these loans, so they just know from their processes if people aren't paying. So when they had a meeting, you know, one of these guys who does this came in and said, well, you know, these loans aren't paying properly. People are having trouble paying. So Jamie Dimon makes that, you know, famous phone call about unloading all this stuff. And in the end of 2006, JP Morgan actually unloaded $12 billion worth of their own originated product. These aren't even loans they bought from other people. These are loans that they originated themselves. And that's part of the reason why, you know, they did so well, is they got rid of their own product.
Right, so they purged themselves of their own toxic sludge that they were selling to customers. And it reminds me, of course, of Goldman Sachs was doing the same type of thing, packaging garbage, selling it to their own customers, and then repackaging and making bets against customers who had bought the stuff that they had just sold them. Let's talk specifically about an issue here of what kind of window is available to go after these fraudsters. the statute of limitations has expired in many cases, but in this particular case, the Greenpoint fraud is still open to prosecution on wire fraud. So first, talk a little bit about the Greenpoint mortgages. You packaged for J.P. Morgan into securities, I believe, the bank sold to investors. Tell us about the Greenpoint mortgages.
Sure, and so what we ultimately happened with this pool that came in is that basically, we were doing this deal, buying the loans, and then it just stopped dead because the diligence managers were actually finding that 40% of the loans were what are called overstated income loans, which basically means you've got people, who are saying they make a whole lot more money than they do. The example that I remember the best was a manicurist who was saying her income was $117,000 a year. But our diligence managers are looking at information we have that, in New York, that's $23,000. Even in LA, that's $21,000. So you're talking about a loan that's somebody's saying their income is 5 times bigger than we know it probably is. But we didn't disclose that. It ended up getting waived in. And what I had done was warned the supervisors that they couldn't actually sell these to investors without telling them. And then I found out years later when I met with the DOJ that they had actually done just that.
Okay, so they committed securities fraud. They committed all kinds of securities violations. Securities Act of 33 and 34, if anyone cares to go review those acts, J.P. Morgan committed fraud on about 50 of the clauses in those 2 acts. But the J.P. Morgan Greenpoint fraud is still open to prosecution on wire fraud charges, which have not yet past the statute of limitations. Is this where we're going to finally take down this financial terrorist, Jamie Dimon?
Part of the reason why I'm coming forward now at this time is it's not just J.P. Morgan. Basically, you've got your securities fraud, which the statute of limitations had almost completely run by the time they even started investigating. And those are really easy cases that are gone now. The wire fraud, when it's wire fraud affecting a financial institution, you have 10 years. So it actually applies to any one of these cases that you can have this 10 years. And, the financial institutions, lots of these certificates were sold to, community banks, credit unions, and that's without even counting the fact that J.P. Morgan itself is, and Citibank and all of these are financial institutions. So part of my concern was that, we've already let one statute of limitations run, and we're getting really close now on even the 10-year ones. And after that, it's done. There's no chance of getting any justice on this.
So how can we help press the banks, particularly Jamie Dimon, on this wire fraud charge? Can we crowdfund some kind of legal fund to put it together as a last gasp effort by the American people to save themselves from one of the worst financial, acts of brazen theft in history of America? Can we do something, maybe get some funds together to put something? What do you think?
Well, look, I really think the only reason we got the task force in the first place is because a whole bunch of people came out, Occupy, journalists like Matt, and just wouldn't let it go until they had to do something. So it's a question of doing that again, having the media pick it up, having people just push on it, writing to your representatives and saying this is something we care about and we need to know what you're doing on this. If you want us to be around for you later, we need you to do this for us now.
But what I'm afraid of, I just see in Mexico this past week, the citizens have finally had enough, and there's huge, they burned down a government building due to this type of fraud that Jamie Dimon and Eric Holder, his cohort in crime, have just been engaged with. Is that what Jamie wants to happen? Does he want his flat on the Upper East Side to be burned down? I mean, it was circled during the Occupy Wall Street movement. He hired some extra guards and extra police, but is that what he wants to, is that what he needs? Is he a masochist at the end of the day? Because he keeps flaunting the fact that he's above the law and stealing billions. All over the world now, people are just burning these people at the stake. Is that what Jamie ultimately is looking for?
I think that's the opposite of what Dimon wants. I think what Dimon wanted was for all of this to go away and for no one to ever know what happened. So now I think he's going to Plan B, which I don't know what that's going to be yet.
Right. Okay. So now we've got about a minute left. So let's talk about your next steps, because basically you've blown the whistle. Yeah. You've stated that you believe that this is kind of a career burner. That is a great personal cost. Yeah. What's your go forward? I mean, Edward Snowden, a whistleblower, is now living, in Russia. I mean, are you prepared? How far are you prepared to take this?
And again, I would never compare myself to anyone involved in anything like that. They take on risks that I go nowhere near. I mean, my thing was basically just come out, talk to people, make it through the next few days, and I had no plan after that because we just had no idea how it was going to go. So what's happened has been completely amazing and just unexpected.
Okay, but you've basically are rubbing their noses in their own criminal behavior. So naturally, the entire mainstream media, the CNBCs, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, will all paint you as a pariah, as this horrible monster in American life. And of course, just because you're telling the truth. But we're out of time, so I have to say goodbye. But Alayne, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Alayne Fleischmann. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.